I watched my dad do that a lot as a child, apologize to us. One time I had real long hair. I was real pudgy in high school. I had real long hair and like my freshman, sophomore year, and he made me get it cut. And I was so angry with him that he made me get my hair cut because I didn't look good. Like I didn't look good with short hair. I looked like a chunky girl with a short haircut, right? Like that's what I looked like. And so I was furious with him. I was in tears. I was so angry. And I remember him coming to me and just like apologizing to me and me making comments like, I can't wait till I grow up and I'm going to grow my hair long and you're never, I was like stuff like that. And then finally, when I was a junior or a freshman or whatever in high school, I finally cut it all the way short. And I was like, man, my parents were super right. I look way better. And I remember him apologizing to me for me feeling that way in that moment. And he wasn't wrong. He was right. Like I was completely wrong in that scenario, but him being willing to like humble himself before me and apologize to me, it just always stuck with me. It just was that's just kind of the kind of person he was. And that's the kind of father that I strive to be, despite being in a different business position, a different financial position, having had my wife is expecting our fifth. So having had 5 children before the age that he was when I was born, that comes with a different level of, I think, like stress and pressure doing that potentially at a little bit of a younger age. But I'm trying to take that example into everything that I do in our home.
Are you a hardworking dad, juggling family responsibilities while dreaming of building wealth through real estate? Welcome to the Invested Fathers Podcast, where we explore how to balance investing and fatherhood. I'm your host, Kenny Johnson, founder of East West Capital. Over the past 5 years, I've been buying real estate to free up my time and secure my family's future. Now I'm here to help you do the same. Join me as we navigate the real estate world together, building wealth and strengthening our families. As my grandma always said, East West, home's best.
We kind of have a passion for, just marriage in general. Marriage is designed to be most intimate, intentional relationship that you're supposed to have. It's supposed to reflect Christ's relationship to the church, and it requires a lot of work, right? I don't think anybody argues that marriage is a lot of work. And, I've officiated about 4 weddings. I've been asked to officiate another wedding here coming up. And one thing that I always talk about when I'm officiating weddings in the ceremony itself is there's no other relationship in your life that's based on love that you choose. You don't choose your parents. You don't choose your family. You don't choose your children. Sometimes you don't even choose your friends, right? You're just in class with those people and they're your friends. But marriage it's an intentional choice to love somebody that you are not in any way like hopefully DNA like related to. And so that requires a different level of nurturing. Right? It requires active love. It requires pursuing that person. It requires communicating with them every single day. You don't communicate with anybody else in your life every single day. You're designed to communicate with your spouse every single day. You don't sleep in the same bed as anybody else every single day. Your life isn't quite as like intertwined with anybody else in the world. And so if that's what marriage is, then it requires different care, consideration, nurturing. And it requires you to seek that person, to pursue that person, to speak their love languages, to love them with an active love. My advice to young people is always like, if you're not prepared to let your spouse be more important to you than you are to you, then you're not ready to get married. And let me clarify what I mean by that. Nobody's ever ready to be married. Like, let me be completely honest with you and just kind of say it straight up. You have to figure out how to do it within the confines of your marriage, and everybody's different. Like every marriage is different. And I'm sure at some point we'll get to some other, backstory stuff, but I tell people the same thing about grief. Everybody's grief is different, right? People are unique and different, and we experience things differently. But the one thing that I can say with tons and tons of confidence is Scripture kind of nails it. If the husband's not ready to sacrifice himself for his wife, and the wife's not ready to revere and prioritize her husband, then that's a dangerous equation. And that's what marriage is you enter into an agreement to make yourself less important than the other person. One of the big reasons that we wanted to do this is because we've seen a lot of young marriages fall apart. And by young marriage, I mean people in their early 20s that have only been married for a year. And I remember when we first got married, I saw things on social media about people I'd gone to school with, and I saw all kinds of different stuff, like already divorced at the age of 24. And it was kind of like, Man, holy smokes, man. Divorce, if you look at scripture, if man and woman are supposed to come together and be one, then when you separate that, it's like gluing two pieces of paper together. When you pull those apart, they're going to rip, they're going to
Mhm.
break. And while you can still, this is not meant to say that everybody who's gone through that painful experience of being divorced is like ruined, because
Mhm.
that I think that's unscriptural too. I don't think Christ ever looks at anybody as being too far gone or too far ruined.
Mhm.
I think his grace is bigger than that, but it does leave you in a state of devastation that I think will never leave you. And so we take it seriously, however dorky it sounds. We take marriage very seriously because we believe that it's just, again, it's the best relationship you can ever experience when it's done the right way.
So Scott Sutter, everybody, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Scott is in Cincinnati. Is that right?
Born and raised.
Okay.
Cincinnati.
Is it a good place to be?
Yeah, so Cincinnati's a little bit of a sleeper town. I don't think people consider it very, very frequently unless you're familiar with it. Procter and Gamble, General Electric, two massive companies that have their hands in things that basically everybody uses, everybody experiences. Tons of CPG products are produced by Procter and Gamble. Tons of aeronautics and just different, I'd say, like engineering and manufacturing related components are managed by General Electric. And so there's just tremendous commerce that comes through Cincinnati. And I've never actually done the research, but per capita, I think it's got to be one of the top, like Fortune 500 per capita.
I mean, you living there, I'm sure there is some merit to just at least feeling that way. Like,
Yeah, 100%. You grow up as a kid and you don't everybody wants to leave. Everybody wants to go live in LA or California or whatever. My brother, he works for a manufacturing company in England. He took a job years back to move over to England, and he's crushing it over there. But what I've discovered as I've kind of begun my career, well, I mean, I'm scarily, I'm 11 years into my career now, but you discover that not only are there huge companies here, like Kroger also is another Fortune 500 company. There are huge companies here. And then there's a very healthy startup community from that as well, because everybody spends 25 years working at Procter and Gamble. And then what do they do when they move on from Procter and Gamble? They start a consulting business or they start their own company and there's tons of opportunity for young people. We've got a couple of awesome schools here in Cincinnati, Xavier and the University of Cincinnati. We've got Cincinnati State. We've got Dayton up the road. Columbus has obviously Ohio State University. You've got Ohio University out in Athens. So, and it's right on the border of Kentucky and Indiana. So quickly you can get into those other states, which have their own levels of commerce and manufacturing in Northern Kentucky, and then a lot of IT and kind of infrastructure related businesses in Indianapolis. So it's a great area in terms of like being able to get to other big cities quickly, being able to find huge opportunities in your career and in commerce. So yeah, I would say it's a great city. I'm a big fan. Two professional sports teams as well, which kind of ebb and flow in terms of like their popularity. But
yeah, tell us about what are you doing today and kind of what's your business?
Yeah, very cool. So I've got a little bit of a what do the young people say these days? Never let them know your next move. Like that's kind of my background, if you will. I grew up on the east side of Cincinnati. I went to Amelia High School, graduated and went to the University of Cincinnati for aerospace engineering. Wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to be an astronaut because when I was a junior in high school, we watched Apollo 13 and somebody in my class made a comment about how scary it would be to be an astronaut. And I was like, I'm doing it. I'm being an astronaut. And so I went, I got accepted into the aerospace engineering program at the University of Cincinnati. As soon as I was out from under my parents' roof, I basically just kind of started doing things my way instead of God's way, instead of their way. So I grew up in a home where there was no alcohol. As soon as I graduated, I started drinking, went to college and thought it was, more or less a kind of a big joke, right? Thought it'd be as easy as it was in high school. I never studied, but high school was relatively simple and easy for me. I graduated with a pretty solid grade point average without spending tons of time working on it. And that's more of an indictment of my character, my work ethic as a young person. But when I went to the University of Cincinnati, I figured out pretty quickly that that's not how engineering school is. Right? You don't just coast through engineering school and then go work at NASA. That's not exactly how the roadmap works. So I ended up flunking out of aerospace engineering after 1 year, and I transferred into mechanical engineering technology, which is another awesome program at the University of Cincinnati. And I was in that for about 2.5 years. Did the same thing that I did my freshman year during that time. Unhealthy relationships, unhealthy lifestyle. I gained a substantial amount of weight and just was not in a very good place, not super happy. So my fourth year. Engineering is a 5-year program at UC. So in my fourth year, so I'd been about 3.5 years into my engineering degree, and I co-opted a few engineering places. And I just started to like kind of figure out a couple of different things. One, I don't think I'm cut out to be an engineer. I'm too social and like jittery, right? Like I can't sit at a desk all day long and really be satisfied by figuring out the tensile strength of carbon fiber. That's not going to do it for me. At the same time, I really started engaging in our church again at a significant level. And your brother-in-law, who is the reason I'm on the podcast with you this morning, was instrumental in helping me kind of reacquire an obedience to the Lord and pursue him again. And I had a complete change, right? And really where I was headed in my trajectory. I decided I was going to walk away from engineering school. I was going to go play basketball at a Christian college somewhere. So the winter of, I guess it was probably like 2011, like that January, I kind of reaffirmed my faith. I got baptized and I started, maybe it was 2012. And I started, just pursuing Christ again and training to go play basketball somewhere without any prospects, right? Like I was like zero prospects, just was like, I'm going to get in shape and try to play basketball at a small school. So I did that for about 6 months. And then I decided to go on a couple of mission trips. And one day I came back from a mission trip and started to fall in love with my now wife. And I told her that I wanted to date her, and she got very excited. And then the same exact day that I told her that, one of the pastors at our church came to me and was like, we just got this letter from the school in Wisconsin that's looking for men to come play on their basketball team. And it just was like holy smokes, right? Like, that's incredible. And it was a small Christian school in Wisconsin. So I started dating my wife the same day I decided to leave Cincinnati and go to Wisconsin. You fast forward through some of that. I played a year of basketball up there. I finished my degree up there. I came home, I got married, and I started working in construction. I was doing project estimating for a family friend. They had a commercial roofing business, and they still do. Great family, great company, True Craft Roofing. I worked there for about 2 years, and then we got pregnant. We were expecting our son, and our oldest son. I moved on from that to work in healthcare, sales and marketing. Did that for about 2 years. Then we were expecting our daughter, and I moved out of healthcare into manufacturing and hydraulics. Did that for about 5 months. My father was diagnosed with a brain tumor. At that same time, I had a friend I had started communicating with about a couple of different business ideas, business prospects. He was starting a business with a couple other people, and he asked me to come in and interview for a sales role at this startup that they were doing. So I went and I interviewed for it, and that was Helium SEO. And I've been there for about 7 years now. And yeah, it's been going awesome. I kind of fell in love with the sales aspect of communication and psychology and helping businesses grow through the product that we had by understanding their needs and building relationships and trust. And then I, at the same time, fell in love with the idea of digital marketing and the power that marketing can really bring into a business and what it can do to help that business grow. So that's where I've been for the last 6.5 years. It's just been a blast, man. It's been a ton of fun working over there and helping them grow.
I think it would help our audience. First off, wow, so much could be explored into each of those moves. And you were not wrong when you said, let's keep the guys guessing on the next move. But man, it's awesome to see how God has led you in different ways. So I think it would help our audience, though, to say, where you've been at the last 2 years, how successful is that company? Like, how are you doing in that role? Yeah. And I mean, say how much money you're making, but like, I think is the company doing well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I have been a 6-figure earner for 4 years now. Last year was the first year where it didn't increase. It went down just a little bit. And last year was a weird year in terms of marketing in general. A lot of companies weren't spending quite as much, but the decrease wasn't substantial in terms of like half or anything like that. Mm-hmm. The company I believe will be close to 10 million at the end of this year. All intents and purposes are that we will continue to kind of climb and grow from there. So yeah, the company's grown from me. I was the first employee they hired to about 40 employees now in the last 6.5 years. And the hope is that obviously that continues to grow. We continue to increase our service offerings, look for new lines of revenue, acquire businesses, things along those lines. I was promoted to the head of sales back in March. And since then, since the promotion, we've consistently hit we're still working towards our kind of like big North Star goal, but we consistently very healthy amount of sales every single month in a meaningful way. So I would say it's going very, very well. Yeah.
Scott, I want to pivot now. Hearing the business is awesome. Personally, the business conversation is something I love. I also love the let's talk dads. Let's talk personal life. And I think my first big question is, you mentioned sort of those rebellion years, leaving your parents. Pendulum sounded like it swung. And if we could kind of go a little bit into that, growing up in your household, what was going on? What was your dad like? How did that look?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just so you know, I'm going to do my best not cry here. So dad did pass away in 2018. That brain tumor ended up, taking his life. So he got diagnosed in January and passed away by July. My father was just a wonderful, wonderful man. He was awesome. And I say that with not a lick of bias. Obviously I have tremendous bias, and I'd be more than happy, if we had an hour and a half, I'd go as deep as I possibly could, but he was just a wonderful dude. And anybody that knows him, meaningfully would say the same thing. Just a phenomenal guy. He grew up in Indiana, and, I don't necessarily think that I'm sharing any sort of dirty laundry and saying that his family they weren't Christians as they were growing up. And so I think that there was probably a lot of turbulence kind of in his own, personal experience as a child. But one thing that was phenomenal about him was his perspective always of who he was in the eyes of Christ, which was basically a sinner who had been redeemed, right? He never lost sight of that concept of, despite my acceptance of Christ, I still desperately need him, right? That you never get to a point where you're like, I'm good, I don't need Christ anymore, I'm saved, and so I've got it, right? That's a very unhealthy way to live as a Christian. And so he was a very tender, very gentle, very, very loving and encouraging father, and was at all the sporting events, was, you could find him in prayer at 2 a.m. in the morning if something was on his heart, journaled for 25 years, never missed a day running for 25 years, 20 years or whatever.
Wow. He
decided to start his own business when I was very young. And so he so he worked kind of as his own, his own guy. And so literally it was the harder he worked, the more likely we were to be, provided for or whatever. And so we never, we weren't by any means a wealthy family, but we were never, never poor in our minds. Right. So he was tall, handsome, very, the term meek comes to mind, right? The concept of meekness is it's control with great capability, right? So it's not, if you're into Jordan Peterson, some of those guys, which I am, so whatever, he describes it really, really well, which is basically you should be capable of things, but not out of control, right? You should be capable of violence, or capable of strength, or capable of command, but under control. And that's kind of how I always, more or less perceive my dad. The other thing I'll tell you about him is that he just loved us kids and my mom so much. He loved us tremendously. And basically would do anything for us, right? And within his capability. And as an adult reflecting back on it, what that now means to me as an adult, as a father, as a husband, is the things that I didn't understand he was doing for us, I now understand he did for us. You know what I mean? You don't always I'll walk around the yard and I'll see my tools all over the yard, or I'll see my stuff having been broken or whatever. And I'll have a quick epiphany and be like, now I understand my dad, that time he was frustrated about this thing, but didn't, yell at me for it, how much control he was expressing. So I'm doing my best to kind of reinforce that I had a absolutely tremendous role model to look at as a father. But one thing that I learned from my dad that I think is, in addition to his faith, in addition to his gentleness, in addition to his tender heart, is that he was a wonderful apologizer. He was great at apologizing. And sometimes that meant that he apologized when he was 1% wrong and 99% right. And sometimes that meant that he apologized when that was reversed, right? He had made a mistake. And so I'm going to do my best not to make anybody that's watching this feel a certain way, but I'm probably a pretty good mix of my mom and dad. So like dad had a very kind of calming presence. And as a 30 to 33 year old, I'll be 34 on Wednesday next week. Actually, my birthday is the 4th of September. I'm still younger than my dad was when I was born. I've also lost my dad. So I've gone through that experience of grief and not having that person that I can look up to. So in terms of my persona and who I am, and this is kind of how my mom was. I'm very driven by kind of like order and respect. And when things start to get kind of loud and crazy, I get loud to calm things down, right? To kind of like dampen things. My dad was very slow to anger, very biblically slow to anger, right? Like I can remember probably a handful of times. And again, you're a kid, so maybe I'm misremembering. Maybe he got loud all the time, but I can only remember several like really specific times where he got loud with me or he got loud with one of my siblings. And it was scary when he got loud. He was a loud guy, right? I feel like, being a young man, having experienced some of the things that I've experienced, that I maybe have a tendency to get louder quicker than he did. The reason I bring that up is the counterpoint. I'm very quick to apologize to my family. I'm very quick to apologize to my children when I do get loud. And the reason why I think that's important, and the reason why I encourage other fathers and other just leaders in general to talk, to apologize and talk through some of those problems as quickly as possible, is because I think there's a lot of focus and pressure on never making mistakes in business, in family, in life. Don't make mistakes. Try to be perfect. Oh, that person made this mistake when they were 35 years ago when they were in college, and now we're gonna cancel them because of it, right? And I think the danger behind that is, again, it goes back to the foundation of our faith, which is like, we desperately need Jesus. And the reason we desperately need Jesus is because we're intrinsically flawed. We are sinful people that aren't perfect. And especially within the Christian community, if you create this perspective that you're perfect, I mean, you see it all the time where pastors have to sacrifice their entire ministry because they made a mistake. And I'm not trying to like give that a pass, or I'm not trying to like gloss over how devastating that can be to a congregation or to a ministry in general. But I mean, the concept of salvation is because we were sinners, Christ died for us, right? And so the reason I try to apologize as quickly as I can. I'm not encouraging fathers to get out there and make mistakes and yell at their families so they can apologize. But what I am saying is, when those mistakes happen, because everybody's imperfect and dads are not perfect, and whether it's anger or neglect or whatever it is, whatever that flaw is, making sure that you communicate with your children. Hey, look, and this is something that I try to say as much as I can. Dad needs Jesus too. Dad's not perfect. Dad needs Jesus too. And I'm really sorry that I should not have got that frustrated that quickly. I'm very, very sorry. Dad's a sinner. Dad needs Jesus too. And that's one of the things that I try to be as intentional as I possibly can about it, because I think the kids really recognize that vulnerability. Our children are a lot smarter sometimes than we give them credit for. They pick up on a lot of different things. And one of the things that I hope my children take away from those moments is, I don't expect them to be perfect, because I'm definitely not perfect. And so when they make mistakes, I try to, as much as I can, I try to communicate with them as to why it was a mistake. But when I make mistakes, I try to do the same thing. Hey, here's why I maybe made a mistake, but that's not an excuse. I'm very sorry. And I made a mistake. Can you forgive me? Right. Stuff like that. So to bring it full circle, I watched my dad do that a lot as a child, apologize to us. One time I had real long hair. I was real pudgy in high school. I had real long hair, and like my freshman, sophomore year, and he made me get a cut. And I was so angry with him that he made me get my hair cut, because I didn't look good. Like, I didn't look good with short hair. I looked like a chunky girl with a short haircut, right? Like, that's what I looked like. And so I was furious with him. I was in tears. I was so angry. And I remember him coming to me and just like apologizing to me, and me making comments like, I can't wait till I grow up and I'm going to grow my hair long, and you're never, I was like, stuff like that. And then finally, when I was a junior or a freshman or whatever in high school, I finally cut it all the way short. And I was like, man, my parents were super right. I look way better. And I remember him apologizing to me for me feeling that way in that moment. And he wasn't wrong. He was right. Like, I was completely wrong in that scenario, but him being willing to like humble himself before me and apologize to me, it just always stuck with me. It just was that's just kind of the kind of person he was. And that's the kind of father that I strive to be, despite being in a different business position, a different financial position, having had, my wife is expecting our fifth. So having had 5 children before the age that he was when I was born, that comes with a different level of, I think, like stress and pressure doing that potentially at a little bit of a younger age. But I'm trying to take that example into everything, everything that I do in our home.
God, that's so powerful. I think I love the key. You talked about a lot of things, physically fit, tall, dark, handsome, hard worker. But I feel like what I glean the most from how you described your dad is the meekness and the forgiveness and that tenderness. I mean, I think you said tender as well. But yeah, you think about fathering, dads, there's kind of a little bit of a, oh, tough, like get up, put some dirt on it and you'll be fine. And I mean, there's a level of, wrestling with your kids and, being strong. But that example of meekness and forgiving, I think, is totally lost in our own minds of like, what does a tough dad look like? And it's, I would say, just as your dad was described, being able to humble himself, be vulnerable, and to a small child or an angry 12-year-old gorilla boy getting on his level and saying, hey, I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry you were sad right now. And how disarming that must have been. But I know unfortunately, we're getting close on time. I want to speak toward, sort of, let's talk to dads today. I mean, you mentioned your fifth is on the way. Congratulations. What are some things that you can just say, hey, you've mentioned your dad. I mean, probably simply put, I want to just copy my dad. But what are some things you're really trying to work on, maybe even struggled with, that like this is a priority that you're focusing on today for investing into your family?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my wife and I, having obviously a pretty young, kind of family, it's very, for us anyways, it's difficult for us to like proactively try to put them in different programs, like sports and dance and all these different things. We have 2 daughters and 2 sons right now. We never find out the gender of the baby that we're going to have. So this is a tiebreaker. We don't know what we're having, but proactively doing things that will build into them. Like she homeschools them, which I think is phenomenal. She got her degree in early childhood education, so she's very equipped to do that. But one thing that we're working on right now is putting them in sports programs, trying to put them in, just different scenarios and settings where it's going to help kind of sharpen and shape them to go on and potentially be leaders, to go on and be contributors within kind of an environment and a setting. And so one thing that we're kind of realizing, in order to do that, we have to sacrifice time and energy and focus more on them than on, potentially on ourselves. Now, we prioritize each other. Every Tuesday, I mentioned, we go on a date night. We like to just, spend time together in the evenings and, kind of focus on each other, her and I do. But on a Saturday morning, you wake up and there's nothing to do that given day. It's nice to be able to just kind of relax and settle into the weekend, as opposed to get up at 8 a.m. and take them to the baseball fields. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. So we're kind of working on, kind of getting to that point where it's like, hey, now is the phase of life where we need to kind of like start doing things to give them the childhood that, ultimately that they want. And that, again, that requires sacrifice. And that might not be something that a lot of families out there struggle with. But for us, it's a big deal, right? It's a big thing to be like, hey, we're gonna dedicate this amount of time to go doing that. The other thing is our like, she does a lot of this with the homeschooling kind of curriculum, but for me, doing devotions with them, they're all on just different levels, right? So it's hard to sit down with the 3 oldest kids and do a devotion because one of them's 5 and he's a maniac. One of them's 6, she'll be 7 here in September, and she's the smartest person in our family, including my wife and I. And then one of them, our oldest, is, he's not much of like an audio learner, right? Like he doesn't learn using his ears. He learns by reading and by doing. So when I'm trying to do devotions with the 3 older kids, you've got one that's kind of sitting there and absorbing, and then the 2 boys that are fighting and making jokes and doing all kinds of stuff. And then they get their sister wound up, and so it's just kind of like figuring out really how to wrangle that. And again, my wife's doing an awesome job of it in the homeschooling, but how do we come together as a family in this stage of life and really do like a meaningful devotion and kind of start laying the foundation of, and again, it is a foundation. We've had some people say, well, we've had some people come to us and be like, well, why would you celebrate a kid accepting Christ when they're 5? Like, they don't even really know what that means. And it's like, I understand what you're saying, but like building a foundation of forgiveness and grace and love and unconditionality, like those are important concepts, I think, for a kid to understand, especially from the people they look up to, right? Mm-hmm. So if mom and dad forgive me for the mistakes I make, if they have grace towards me, if they have mercy towards me, if they themselves are admitting that they need Jesus, that helps build a positive foundation, as opposed to going to a child and saying like, hey, maybe you were created in the wrong body, or hey, maybe you don't have to forgive people, or maybe this or that. Which is a lot of that narrative that the world wants. Like, if we can create a foundation of like, hey, there's something bigger than just us. There's something bigger than me or you or whatever. It shows a surrender, and I think it shows a really positive submission to authority that will translate as they get older. If I go to a kid and I tell him like, no matter how you feel, you're right. Mm-hmm. Well, how does that kid then learn how to submit to the Lord? Like they just don't, right? So those are the sorts of things that we're kind of working on right now. And I wouldn't necessarily say that we're struggling with them as much as it is like kind of like a deep breath. And as I mentioned before, typically when I commit to something, it's difficult for me to like stop committing to it, right? It can take me a little longer than the average person maybe to like make that commitment, but I do not like quitting things. Like I do not like saying I'm going to start this with the intention of quitting it. So I think we're trying to kind of wrap our head around, well, how do we actually make this happen so that we don't have to then turn around and say, you know what, let's pull the plug, let's back out. So that's why that might be a little bit of a steeper climb for the two of us than the average family. But
Scott, on behalf of all the fathers out there, you're doing a great job, buddy. I love it. I think I'm so tickled, I guess, just to hear what you're into, what you're like, the struggles that you have are I want my kids to be the best kids they can be. Yeah. And it seems so selfless but also rewarding. As dads, we love seeing our kids happy, our families happy. It's just the best. Scott, just in closing here, if our audience wanted to keep up with what you're doing, whether in business or just dadding, would you direct them? Where should they go to see what you're up to?
Yeah, great question. So I kind of backed out of social media more or less for a couple of reasons. One, I think that there's a significant lack of wisdom in most social media, and then it's a battleground for fathers, in my opinion. There's content out there that can distract the father from being a great father, great man, and a great Christian and husband. So I kind of backed away from social media, but my wife is on social media and she's got a pretty strong following. Her what's that? Whatever her name or whatever.
Handle.
Thank you. Yeah. Is Sarah Beth Sutter. I believe it's Sarah_Beth_Sutter. And then our podcast is Banter and Bliss Podcast. We also have a YouTube channel. You can find us on the YouTube channel. We'll be starting that back up here shortly. And then you can find me on LinkedIn. I try to be as active as I can on LinkedIn. And then I work for a company called Helium SEO. The SEO stands for Search Engine Optimization. We help businesses grow using digital marketing. So typically through Google, either paid or organic search. We can also, execute social media advertising for businesses as well. So yeah, I would love to connect with anybody that's interested in and needs that sort of support for their business, or just wants to talk about ideas. I'm a big believer in adding value as much as I can.
I've loved this conversation. Scott, good luck with everything you got going on today. Definitely looking forward to reconnecting down the road. I'll see you on those, maybe LinkedIn or something, but thanks again for your time today.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Invested Fathers Podcast. If you liked this episode, we would love for you to click subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. We appreciate all of your hard work as a father and look forward to our next episode together.